Influence isn't about position. It's about perception. The moment you walk into a room with senior management, they're not just hearing your words, they're measuring your conviction. They're asking themselves, does this person see what we don't yet see? Because leaders aren't moved by noise, they're moved by clarity, courage, and the confidence that you understand the bigger picture. You don't influence senior management by speaking louder. You influence them by thinking higher. Every conversation becomes a test, not of how much you know, but of how deeply you believe in what you're saying. Influence saying. Influence starts when you stop trying to impress and start trying to align. The clock is always ticking in rooms of power. Every second you spend talking without meaning is a second closer to being forgotten. The urgency isn't in what you present. It's in how you connect what matters to them with what matters to you. Six punchy. Attention. Grabbing keynotes. Headings. You don't influence up. You align across. Clarity is louder than confidence. Speak the language of impact, not effort. Belief outranks brilliance in every boardroom. Silence isn't weakness. It's strategy. If you can't make them feel it, you'll never make them move. You said you don't influence up. You align across. Expand it to 500 words based on the overall topic and title. Write it in the style of Sinek without mentioning his name. The speech should focus on men's psychology from a men's and women's perspective. Don't include any ending sentence or conclusion, and avoid using headings. Each paragraph should start with a strong sentence that naturally introduces the key point in context. ChatGPT said, influence isn't about hierarchy, it's about connection. Many people approach senior management with the mindset of trying to move upward, assuming that the higher the title, the harder the climb. But the truth is, influence doesn't move vertically, it moves horizontally through trust, alignment, and shared understanding. The leaders above you are not walls to scale, they are minds to align with. The moment you stop trying to prove your worth and start trying to show shared purpose, the dynamic changes. You no longer sound like an employee making a point. You sound like a partner offering perspective. The psychology of influence, especially in men, often leans toward performance. Men are conditioned to equate influence with dominance, to be the one who leads the conversation, owns the room, and convinces others through assertiveness. But real influence doesn't come from taking control, it comes from creating alignment. When you align across, you shift from trying to win approval to building mutual respect. Senior leaders don't respond to force, they respond to resonance. They listen when they sense that you see the world through their eyes, not just your own. From a woman's perspective, alignment often feels more intuitive. Women tend to influence through connection, empathy, and understanding, qualities that naturally bridge the psychological gap between levels of leadership. Yet, even this strength can be misinterpreted in environments that prize decisiveness over depth. The balance of influence, therefore, lies in combining masculine clarity with feminine intuition, the courage to speak directly, and the sensitivity to understand deeply. When both energies meet, influence becomes effortless. You stop chasing attention and start commanding presence. Alignment begins with language. Senior management thinks in terms of strategy, outcomes, and long-term impact. If your language revolves around tasks, effort, or personal ambition, you sound like someone trying to be seen. But when you start speaking in terms of shared vision, measurable impact, and organizational meaning, you sound like someone who already belongs at the table. Influence across means translating your ideas into the language of leadership, framing them in ways connect what matters to you with what matters to them. What often prevents alignment is ego. The subtle need to be right instead of relevant. Men, in particular, struggle with this because being right feels like winning. But influence is not about winning, it's about movement. You can't align across if your goal is to dominate. Senior leaders aren't looking for followers who fight when looking for thinkers who fight for the purpose. When you let go of the need to prove and replace it with the desire to contribute, the conversation transforms. You no longer defend your point. You expand theirs. True influence happens when your presence doesn't feel like competition but completion. When you enter a room and make senior leaders feel understood, you lower their defenses and open their minds. Influence across is the art of mirroring vision, not mimicking authority. It's the ability to connect intellect with intention, to show that your success isn't separate from theirs, but part of the same story. In those moments, hierarchy fades, titles dissolve, and what remains is alignment, the invisible bridge between credibility and trust. You said clarity is louder than confidence. Expand it to 500 words based on the overall topic and title. Write it in the style of Sinek without mentioning his name. The speech should focus on men's psychology from a men's and women's perspective. Don't include any ending sentence or conclusion, and avoid using headings. Each paragraph should start with a strong sentence that naturally introduces the key point in context. ChatGPT said, confidence can capture attention, but clarity keeps it. Most people believe that to influence senior management, you need to project authority, stand tall, speak boldly, and sound sure. But confidence without clarity is just well-delivered confusion. The leaders in the room aren't listening for how certain you sound. They're listening for how clearly you think. Confidence is a performance. Clarity is proof. It shows that you've thought deeply, refined your ideas, and anchored them in purpose rather than emotion. When your message is clear, it doesn't compete for attention. It earns it. Men often equate confidence with control. They believe influence depends on appearing strong, decisive, and unshakable, especially in front of senior leaders. Yet what many fail to realize is that overconfidence often creates distance, not respect. Senior management doesn't need another voice that sounds sure. They need one that sounds certain for a reason. Clarity cuts through ego. It shows humility, discipline, and awareness. Qualities that make leaders listen, not just hear. When a man speaks with clarity, it's not his tone that commands attention. It's the precision of his thought that earns credibility. From a woman's perspective, clarity carries a different kind of power. Women often have an intuitive grasp of nuance and emotion. They can sense the undercurrent in a room before words are spoken. But in environments where confidence is mistaken for competence, women sometimes feel the need to amplify their tone rather than simplify their message. The most influential women understand that clarity isn't about speaking louder. It's about speaking truer. When you strip away the filler, the hesitation, and the need to please, what remains is authenticity. And authenticity, when expressed with clarity, is magnetic. Clarity creates direction, where confidence creates impression. Senior leaders are surrounded by confident people. Every meeting, every presentation, every pitch. What stands out isn't who sounds the most certain, but who makes the complex simple. Clarity doesn't just answer questions. It anticipates them. It organizes chaos into understanding. It helps senior management see what you see, not just hear what you say. That's what makes clarity the loudest voice in the room. It speaks directly to the mind, not just to the ears. The pursuit of clarity requires courage. The courage to slow down when others rush, to ask the uncomfortable questions, and to admit when something doesn't make sense. Men often fear that asking questions might make them look unsure, while women often hesitate because they don't want to appear challenging. But both perspectives, Mr. Truth Clarity serves everyone. The moment you seek clarity, you demonstrate leadership. Not because you have all the answers, but because you refuse to move without understanding. Clarity transforms influence from performance to presence. When you speak with precision, people stop doubting your intentions and start trusting your direction. Senior management doesn't remember who sounded the most confident. They remember who made the most sense. Clarity doesn't just communicate ideas. It creates alignment. It makes people feel safe in your vision because they can finally see it too. You said, speak the language of impact, not effort. Expand it to 500 words based on the overall topic and title. Write it in the style of Sinek without mentioning his name. The speech should focus on men's psychology from a men's and women's perspective. Don't include any ending sentence or conclusion, and avoid using headings. Each paragraph should start with a strong sentence that naturally introduces the key point in context. ChatGPT said effort. Tells people how hard you're working. Impact tells them why it matters. Too often, professionals walk into meetings with senior, ready to defend their work, list their hours, and prove their dedication. But senior leaders aren't moved by how much you've done. They're moved by what difference it made. The language of effort is about you. The language of impact is about them. The business, the people, and the future. The moment you shift your communication from what you did to what you changed, you stop sounding like someone trying to be recognized and stop sounding like someone worth remembering. Men, by nature, are wired to find identity in their effort. They take pride in the grind, in being the one who works longer, pushes harder, and sacrifices more. But that mindset, while noble, can become a trap when speaking to senior management. Leaders at the top don't reward motion, they reward meaning. They're not counting the hours you've invested. They're evaluating the outcomes you've influenced. When a man speaks from effort, he seeks validation. When he speaks from impact, he creates value. The shift isn't about changing your work ethic. It's about changing your lens. Effort earns empathy, but impact earns influence. From a woman's perspective, the conversation around effort often carries another weight. Women are frequently expected to prove their worth through overcommitment, to show they can do it all and still smile through it. Yet in rooms of leadership, this narrative doesn't translate. Senior management doesn't see the invisible labor behind the results. They see the results themselves. The most powerful women understand this. They don't compete on how much they've carried. They communicate on how much they've changed. When women learn to frame their contributions in the language of outcomes, not output, they shift from being appreciated to being indispensable. The language of impact is a language of clarity, purpose, and relevance. It answers the unspoken question every senior leader asks: why does this matter? When you can connect your actions to a measurable improvement, a strategic shift, or a cultural ripple, your message carries weight. You're no longer presenting information. You're shaping direction. Impact reframes effort into meaning. It shows that your energy wasn't spent for approval, but invested for advancement. What often prevents people from speaking the language of impact is fear. The fear of sounding arrogant, the fear of overselling, or the fear of not being enough. Men tend to hide behind confidence. Women tend to hide behind modesty. Both miss the point. Impact isn't about exaggeration. It's about translation. It's taking your hard work and articulating it through the lens of value creation. It's showing that what you did wasn't just busy. It was beneficial. Every conversation with senior management is an opportunity to redefine perception. When you speak the language of effort, you sound like someone working within the system. When you speak the language of impact, you sound like someone shaping it. Influence isn't earned by effort alone. It's earned by showing that your actions move the mission forward, not just your career. Impact is the bridge between what you've done and what the organization becomes, because you did it. You said, "Belief outranks brilliance in every boardroom. Expand it to 500 words based on the overall topic and title. Write it in the style of Sinek without mentioning his name. The speech should focus on men's psychology from a men's and women's perspective. Don't include any ending sentence or conclusion and avoid using headings. Each paragraph should start with a strong sentence that naturally introduces the key point in context." ChatGPT said, "Brilliance can impress people, but belief moves them." In boardrooms filled with intelligence, experience, and data, it's not always the smartest voice that shapes the outcome. It's the most convicted one. People don't follow ideas because they're perfect. They follow people because they're certain. When you speak with belief, you don't just share information, you transfer conviction. Senior management doesn't need another set of facts. They need to feel that you see what they can't yet prove. Belief turns logic into leadership. It bridges the gap between what is and what could be. Men often confuse belief with dominance. They think belief means being the loudest in the room, the one who speaks first and refuses to back down. But belief isn't noise. It's steadiness. It's the quiet confidence that doesn't need to overpower to be felt. In the psychology of men, belief becomes influence when it's anchored in purpose, not pride. Senior leaders don't respond to arrogance masked as confidence. They respond to conviction grounded in clarity. When a man speaks from belief, he doesn't try to convince, he compels. His presence shifts from competitive to collaborative, and that's when influence begins. From a woman's perspective, belief carries a subtler, yet equally powerful force. Women often internalize the need to be perfectly prepared before they speak up, fearing that confidence without total certainty might be seen as risk. Belief isn't about knowing everything. It's about standing for something. Senior management isn't looking for flawless answers. They're looking for courageous conviction. The most influential women understand that belief is not arrogance. It's alignment with truth. When they speak from that inner certainty, the entire room recalibrates. People listen differently when they sense that you believe deeply in what you're saying. Belief builds credibility faster than brilliance because it connects emotionally before it convinces intellectually. Facts appeal to reason, but belief appeals to trust. And trust is the real currency of influence. Senior management will question your numbers, but they rarely question your conviction. When you believe in your message, your energy carries a quiet certainty that statistics can't replicate. The room doesn't just hear you. It starts to feel your vision. Brilliance can explain the future, but belief makes people want to build it. What prevents most people from leading with belief is the fear of being wrong. Men worry about losing credibility. Women worry about losing acceptance. Both fears lead to hesitation, and hesitation kills influence. The truth is, belief isn't about being right. It's about being rooted. It's choosing to stand firm in purpose, even when outcomes are uncertain. Senior management isn't inspired by perfection. They're inspired by conviction under pressure. Belief gives them confidence in you, not because you have every answer, but because you have something stronger. The courage to commit before results are visible. Belief turns presence into persuasion. It shows that your ideas are not just intellectual exercises, but emotional investments. People don't rally behind brilliance. They rally behind those who believe so deeply that doubt becomes irrelevant. In every boardroom, the real leader isn't always the one with the best plan. It's the one whose belief makes others believe too. You said, silence isn't weakness. It's strategy. Expand it to 550 words based on the overall topic and title. Write it in the style of Sinek without mentioning his name. The speech should focus on men's psychology from a men's and women's perspective. Don't include any ending sentence or conclusion, and avoid using headings. Each paragraph should start with a strong sentence that naturally introduces the key point in context. ChatGPT said, silence has power because it creates space for meaning. In a world that rewards those who speak fast and think loud, silence is often misunderstood as hesitation. But in the presence of senior management, silence is not a gap. It's a signal. It tells the room that you're not rushing to be heard. You're choosing to be intentional. The most influential voices in a boardroom aren't always the ones filling the air. They're the ones shaping it. Silence draws attention, not because it's empty, but because it's rare. It invites curiosity, commands patience, and turns a moment of pause into a moment of power. Men often see silence as a threat to their credibility. From an early age, they're taught that leadership means quick answers, confident tones, and constant motion. But influence doesn't come from how fast you respond. It comes from how wisely you do. When a man learns to use silence, he stops reacting and starts reflecting. Senior management doesn't respect those who talk over noise. They respect those who rise above it. Silence gives men the space to think strategically, to listen deeply, and to respond with clarity instead of ego. It shifts the perception from defensiveness to discipline, from pressure to poise. For women, silence carries a different challenge. Too often, a woman's quiet is mistaken for doubt or compliance rather than strength. Yet, when used with intention, silence becomes her sharpest form of influence. A well-timed pause can disarm a room that expects her to prove herself. It creates tension, not of uncertainty, but of presence. Senior leaders notice when someone doesn't rush to fill the void. They sense confidence in restraint. When a woman pauses before she speaks, she redefines the rhythm of the conversation. She sets the tempo rather than following it. That is the psychology of quiet influence, leading not by volume, but by control. Silence isn't the absence of communication, it's the amplification of awareness. It allows you to observe what others miss. Tone, body language, hesitation, intent. Senior management pays attention to those who pay attention. When you use silence to listen, you start to understand not just what's being said, but what's being meant. That's where influence lives, in the space between words. Silence gives you leverage because it reveals what others are trying to hide through their noise. The one who listens most deeply always speaks most effectively. Strategic silence also changes the psychology of authority. The moment you pause before answering a question, you show that your words have weight. You turn every sentence into a decision. Senior leaders aren't impressed by people who always have something to say. They're impressed by those who speak only when it matters. Silence is a filter. It removes insecurity, reveals confidence, and commands focus. It transforms conversation into dialogue and performance into purpose. The fear of silence is rooted in insecurity. The belief that if you're not talking, you're not valuable. But influence is never measured by word count. It's measured by impact. Men often fill silence to prove knowledge. Women often avoid silence to prove participation. Both lose power in the process. The true strategist understands that silence is not retreat, it's preparation. It's the pause that gathers perspective, the breath that shapes conviction, the calm that precedes clarity. In a world that mistakes noise for leadership, silence becomes the ultimate act of control. The moment you stop chasing influence and start embodying it, you said, If you can't make them feel it, you'll never make them move. Expand it to 600 words based on the overall topic and title. Write it in the style of Sinek without mentioning his name. The speech should focus on men's psychology from a men's and women's perspective. Don't include ending sentence or conclusion and avoid using headings. Each paragraph should start with a strong sentence that naturally introduces the key point in context. ChatGPT said logic can make people think, but emotion makes them act. In the rooms where decisions shape direction and words shape destiny, influence doesn't belong to the one with the best argument. It belongs to the one who makes people feel something real. Senior management isn't moved by spreadsheets, metrics, or polished slides. They're moved by conviction, by energy, by the sense that what's being said has meaning beyond numbers. If you can't make them feel it, you'll never make them move. Because no matter how rational a boardroom may look, it's still filled with human beings, each driven by emotion first and logic later. Men, in particular, often struggle with this truth. They're taught that influence comes from strength, composure, and certainty, that emotion belongs at home, not in a meeting. But emotion isn't weakness, it's connection. Senior leaders don't remember the facts you presented. They remember how you made them feel about those facts. A man who can connect his message to emotion stands out, not because he's louder, but because he's alive. When he speaks with feeling, he bridges the gap between intellect and instinct. He stops presenting and starts inspiring. The psychology of male influence shifts the moment a man learns that vulnerability doesn't erode authority, it deepens it. From a woman's perspective, emotion is often a natural strength, but a professional risk. Women tend to communicate with empathy, awareness, and a sense of relational understanding. Qualities that connect deeply, but are too often misunderstood as being too emotional. Yet it's precisely that emotional intelligence that creates the deepest form of influence. Senior management doesn't need less emotion. They need the right kind of emotion, grounded in conviction, not reaction. When a woman speaks from purpose instead of pressure, her emotion becomes power. It turns her presence from persuasive to unforgettable. The truth about influence is that facts inform, but feelings transform. You can explain a strategy all day, but unless people feel why it matters, nothing changes. Senior leaders are surrounded by logic. They crave belief. They're drawn to the person who can take data and turn it into direction, who can make a business decision feel like a human one. Emotion gives context to logic. It adds meaning to numbers. When you make someone feel the urgency, the hope, or the possibility behind your idea, you give them something to believe in. And belief always precedes action. What often limits emotional influence is fear. The fear of being misunderstood, appearing unprofessional, or losing composure. Men suppress emotion to seem strong. Women dilute it to seem accepted. But emotion, when mastered, is not chaos. It's clarity. It shows that you care enough to be invested. Senior management doesn't need more polished performers. They need passionate believers. People follow those who make them feel safe, inspired, or challenged. That emotional imprint lasts far longer than any logical argument ever could. Every great communicator knows that influence lives in tone, not just in words. It's in the pause before conviction, the rise in energy when passion peaks, the look that says, "I mean this." When you embody your message, people stop analyzing and start absorbing. Senior management isn't just evaluating your idea. They're subconsciously measuring how much you believe in it. When you make them feel your conviction, they begin to share it. The emotion transfers belief faster than logic can explain it. To make people move, you must first make them care. Influence is not about telling others what to think. It's about awakening what they already believe, but haven't yet acted on. Emotion is the ignition point, the spark that turns understanding into urgency. Whether it's a man learning to lead with heart instead of ego, or a woman learning to trust her emotional depth as her greatest strength, influence begins the moment logic meets feeling. When your message carries emotion, it doesn't just reach their minds. It moves their will. And in leadership, movement is the only measure that truly matters.